Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dreamscript and this is the Rough Cut Diamond Mines, the place I go to find the rough ideas that we can then maybe turn into something a little more polished. Hope everybody had a happy new year. We're starting the first video of the new year with continuing the last few prompts of the Cursed Relics Art Challenge. Having fun with these and keeping up the creativity we've had so far. So enough of this preamble stuff, let's get into our next prompt. Day 13 of the Cursed Relics Art Challenge is a bowl. Cursed pottery and dishes in general aren't that common, or at least not as far as I've seen. We don't talk about the cursed imagery you find on Google. If there is something about them, it's more about the symbolism behind the dish rather than the dish itself that is the bearer of the curse. Off the top of my head, the only thing I can think of is this ghost story in Japan about a woman who breaks a plate from a prized family set and is killed as punishment. Her spirit coming back each night and counting the remaining plates and then screaming when it comes to the missing broken one. But that's not really about the dishes themselves, more about the value of them over her own life, depending on which version of the story you've heard, of course. So, obviously, I don't have a lot of framework to start with this one, but hey, that's part of the fun of these challenges after all. I get to make the rules for what I could make this curse do, though I do need something to get me going in the right place. How about we grab our curse intensity and see what we're working with there? You know the drill at this point. Spin the wheel! And eesh, it's another deadly fast! Oh boy. Okay, don't panic. This isn't nearly as bad as it was with Jade. Honestly, it can never be worse than it was with that one ended up being. Mostly because I haven't nailed down any of the other elements, so I have some flexibility still. So, a bowl that kills a victim quickly. I know that when I did do this with the Jade, I kind of made it instantaneous, but I wonder what is actually considered sudden death in a medical sense. Let me look this one up. Okay, 24 hours. I can work with that. Not nearly as dramatic nor entertaining as an insta-karma curse effect. If you have an I'ma touch it person in your games, you know the one. But hey, we got some wiggle room. Well, since I'm already researching, I wonder what can grow in 24 hours. I know some insects do, but one moment, please. Where the hell is that one sticker? There you are! Feast your eyes, folks. It's time to make some mushroom soup bowls. Let's go. We're making this cursed artifact. First things first. I do feel like I need to put one more warning on here before I continue. This is the part of the video where things are going to get a little extra gross, and I want to make sure that people are adequately warned about it. If you saw the warning at the beginning of this video and still made it this far, I just want to make sure you remembered that I put this phobia in the warnings. And this is your last chance to back out if you need to. There's no shame here. Look after yourselves. Still here? Let's get to it then. So, let's get the obvious mushroom elephant out of the way. Yes, I'm aware of The Last of Us. No, I have not watched, played, or really seen much of it myself. I don't especially get interested in most zombie-based media these days. I think the last thing I watched and mildly enjoyed was the Warm Bodies movie, but I've heard that I enjoyed that one more than others because I hadn't previously read the book it was based off of. But regardless, yes, I am very aware of how easily I could have taken this prompt in that particular direction. But that wasn't the plan I had for this one, or at least not entirely. See, while I haven't watched The Last of Us series to any substantial degree, I have seen the designs for the clickers, and hell's bells are those horrifying evolutionary conclusions of the zombie ant fungus, and I love them. I can think of a couple of people here in the depths that have begged on their knees for permission to try and find a way to make this work for combat purposes. I don't think they've actually gotten permission yet, though, sadly. But in the meantime, maybe I can provide them with some ideas. Starting with some of the various types of mushrooms that could be used. Because Obviously, everyone is familiar with the traditional red and white spotted Amanita breed of mushroom, and shelf mushrooms are good for filling space in higher places, which I did use on the mirror prompt, but there is a whole world full of mushrooms to pick from. And I decided I wanted to play with the style of one known as the bleeding tooth mushroom, as it is especially gross and gooey looking. If you've ever seen these guys, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Though I don't know what it is about it, but every time I saw a picture of this mushroom when I was working on this, I always just had a sudden craving for toast with a ton of jam. I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. Or hungry. Possibly both. Probably both. Speaking of hungry, though, getting back to the curse element of this artifact, I think it should probably be one that has a trigger to it, like eating from the bowl itself. Similarly to what I did with the Jade prompt, Deadly Fast that just works indiscriminately and instantly doesn't really give me much to work with as far as setup to it goes. It makes it kind of difficult to write an interesting story of an instant kill item that has no known history in its own world because it just kills anyone who happens to trip over it. Not impossible, mind you, but certainly difficult to do well. I will say that these art challenges have had me stretching myself in ways I wasn't expecting before I started. Part of that also coming from the time frame I gave myself for it, in trying my best to put out one of these videos each week as best I can. But it's been a good learning experience for myself, and I do plan to do more of these challenges in the future, even after we finish with this one. I don't know, maybe I'll put a poll up for the next one I do. We'll find out. Either way, why don't we jump into the story of this one, and I see how bad I can gross everybody out this time. Enjoy! The traveling life isn't always the easy, carefree path that many wistfully dream about. There's a great deal of uncertainty that comes to that kind of life. Food and shelter are not always guaranteed. Money even less so, if you don't have a marketable skill. But there's nothing compared to the freedom it grants and the wide breadth of people and cultures you get exposed to. Those same people that can sometimes be the only thing that keeps you from starving or sleeping out in the cold. But it is important to be cautious when one has to rely so heavily on the generosity of others to survive, as not all that is offered is always done so with the best of intentions, especially when it comes to food or shelter. These were lessons that were well known to the traveling performer as he was strumming his instruments along a path between towns, thinking of his next songs and stories he would perform for that town. But the road ahead was still long, and the weather was starting to look ugly, with dark storm clouds and the distant rolls of thunder already reaching his ears. There is a nearby forest he could take shelter in for the worst of the storm, but he had heard stories about those woods. Stories about strange creatures that roam those woods. The neighboring townfolk had been happy to share the terrifying stories of mutilated, shuffling forms that wandered the woods, covered in oozing wounds. The mindless remains of anyone foolish enough to eat the dangerous fungi within those woods. But the performer had been lucky enough to gather some supplies before leaving that previous town. He had enough food to make it to the next town easily, even if he did have to pause for the night. So he didn't need to rely on the woods themselves for food. And from the sounds of the stories about the creatures, they only lasted a short while. So maybe he would be lucky and it would be a peaceful night there. Willing to take the gamble, the performer made for the woods, quickly setting up his tent within a few yards of the edge of the trees. Not too deep, but decently sheltered from the coming storm. And for a while it was a nice, pleasant evening, the rain sounding gentle on the leaves of the trees overhead as the performer played to himself. Long enough that the darkness of the storm was deepened by coming nightfall, making the performer's campfire glow all the brighter in the woods. As the darkness grew, though, the performer started to hear rustling in the woods. He snapped to attention, grabbing the knife he carried with him as his only means for defense. But he quickly relaxed when he sees a woman approaching his small camp. An older woman, hunched over with a basket of herbs at her hip and a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She seemed to wear some kind of amulet, possibly one for protection, around her neck. She looked surprised at the sight of him, having probably only seen the flickering of the fire and come to investigate.
"You should not be in this forest, young man,"
the woman says.
"Surely you've heard the dangers of these woods. You should leave as soon as possible."
When the performer explains he only plans to wait out the storm before moving on, she nods, but still watches him with worry.
"Keep your eyes on the sky, then,"
she says.
"and don't wander too deep into the forest. There are things there that can only bring you harm. I doubt such a thing will happen, but if you must travel deeper into the woods, heed my warning. No matter what you do, no matter what you may see, no matter how hungry you may feel, do not eat from the bowl."
With that cryptic and confusing warning ringing in his ears, the woman left him alone, her sudden appearance and just a swift departure making the performer curious. It was almost like she was trying to hide something. And the idea of what she could be hiding and what bowl she was talking about would not leave him in peace until he found out. Leaving the majority of his things at his camp, he quietly followed the path the woman had left in. She was traveling deeper into the woods, which, given her warning, made the performer even more curious and suspicious. The trees were denser here, and it was becoming harder to keep track of the woman as he followed her. After tripping on a particularly gnarled tree root, he lost sight of her completely. Grumbling to himself for such carelessness, the performer made to turn around and return to his camp, despite his thwarted curiosity. But, as he did, he noticed something glittering in the distance, and he could feel the pull of something at the edge of his senses. He followed the feeling, straining to see through the darkness, still hearing the rumbles of the storm overhead as he moves deeper into the forest. He can just make out the shapes of what look like people standing in a clearing. Rain isn't coming through the trees, so this must be a sheltered clearing. Pushing bushes aside and entering the clearing, the performer recoils as he sees the people clearly now, his stomach nearly turning inside out from the sight of them. There are dozens of them, all standing as if frozen in a circle around a stump of a chopped-down tree. People that are almost unrecognizable as humans, each one of them covered in gaping hole-like wounds to varying degrees. Some are completely pockmarked from head to toe, each hole dripping with a dark, blood-red ooze. Others only have a few holes across their forms, but each and every one of them have that ooze dripping from their eye sockets and mouths. There's not a trace of life in their faces. Only the faint sound of insects buzzing about, occasionally landing on the figures without reaction. And then, in the middle of this clearing of these mutilated people, sitting on top of the stump, is a single bowl, filled with a similar red liquid that is forming into a giant dewdrop within it. The performer suddenly pales as he feels an overwhelming urge to pick up the bowl and eat whatever that red goop is. He tries to back away from the clearing, but something won't let him move that way. It's like something about the bowl itself is offering itself to him. And sadly, he's never been able to turn down a freely offered thing, especially with his particular lifestyle. But he tries. He desperately tries to resist. Do not eat from the bowl. Do not eat from the bowl! The performer kept repeating the woman's words to himself as he tries to look away from the bowl, hoping to break the pull it has over him. But, despite his very real efforts to do so, he can't quite seem to fight off the pull the bowl has over him, approaching the stump that it rests on. The static forms around the stump don't even stir as he moves around them, all facing the bowl similar to spectators gathering for a show. Or perhaps an initiation of some kind. He falls to his knees before the stump and slowly picks up the bowl in his hands. The texture is just as pockmarked as the figures around it. The textures of the holes on the sides of it making his skin crawl. A sensation that only grows as he feels something oozing from those holes as well. That same thick, goopy liquid from within the bowl itself. And yet, despite all of this, he still can't find the will to stop himself as he raises the bowl to his lips and tastes the liquid within. It's a sweet taste on his tongue which surprises him as he finds himself gulping it down, quickly emptying the bowl. And it's only when the bowl is empty that he finally regains control of his body. The performer drops the bowl back on the stump, immediately trying to cough back up the liquid in a vain attempt to stop himself from joining the masses that surround this point in the forest. But he can already tell it's too late. As soon as the liquid touched his lips, it was too late. Within him, he can already feel his stomach churning as the cursed liquid starts taking root. He doesn't know how long he has as himself, but he can tell it's not long. With the panic setting in, the performer starts to run from the clearing. Where he plans to go, he isn't too sure. All he can think is to get away and possibly find someone who can help him. His heart pounds as his skin begins to itch, his pores already opening and starting to widen. It's like watching a pot of water boil, his skin popping as the holes emerge, and it's just as painful as one expects, though there is no blood at this point. It first starts at his hands, his precious hands that touch the bowl, and then start to creep up his arms and along the rest of his body. He nearly vomits when he feels the same sensation start in his mouth, causing teeth to fall out and holes bubbling from his tongue. And yet still he runs. And he feels like once again he's being drawn somewhere. There in the very near distance, he can see some kind of structure standing in the woods. His vision is already starting to blur, his eyes slowly turning into the same red color as the liquid from the bowl and the other figures, and starting to become the same goopy consistency. As he draws near, he can see the structure as a house. Possibly the house of a witch by the looks of the protective wardings around it. If it is a witch, perhaps they will have some magical means of helping him. A cure to this curse. He reaches forward to knock on the door, hoping to find the help he needs. The pain of his body is growing so that every movement feels like he's being slowly skinned by thousands of tiny needles. Even the small effort to lift his hand and knock on the hardwood is enough to make him fall to his knees, hugging his own body as the taste of iron starts to ooze into his mouth, making him cough violently. The door slowly opens before him, and when he looks up, he sees the woman from earlier. From what little he can still see, he sees she is unsurprised and tired, her eyes holding little to no pity for his state.
Please, help me.
He's able to croak, blood bubbling in his mouth and trailing down his chin.
I tried to,
the woman said, and her voice betrayed her own exhaustion.
I warned you not to go near the bowl. I warned you not to go eat from it.
He begs again for help, one of his eyes going completely blind as it starts to ooze from his head, feeling the liquid dripping down his face.
There is nothing I can do to help you now,
the woman replies.
I warned you, yet you did not heed my warning. I cannot help someone who cannot listen or follow basic instructions.
And she closes the door on him with a snap. The performer collapses in a heap on the doorstep, his body shaking as the holes across his entire body start to ooze. He thought he might already be numb to the pain filling his body, but no, he can still feel the way his skin itches from the pain, the sharp stabbing feeling as his own blood rolls across it. It's like the pain of what's happening to him is wiping away his memories, his mind turning to mush as he lays on the forest floor, his insides liquefying and oozing out of the gaping holes. None of the ones near the stump looked nearly as bad as he felt. Had running only made it worse? He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't move now. only just able to roll himself onto his back. There's a tiny sliver of sky visible above the woman's house, and he can just see patches of blue in the stormy skies overhead, before his vision finally goes completely dark, his other eye consumed by the curse. Okay, I hope I didn't put anyone too much off their food, though in fairness, you probably shouldn't have been eating during this one, but whatever. This one was fun to come up with, and I'm pretty proud of how gross it feels. Big thanks to everyone for making it this far into the video. There's only a couple of these cursed relics left on the prompt list, and then we'll be moving on to something else, but we still have those speed draws to look forward to in the meantime, so I hope I'll see you all here again. Until then, sweet dreams, and here's to all the little things that bring out the magic in you.